saying, I'm going to give you a son. So when God calls Abram, he's called Abram in Genesis 12, he says, I'm going to give you what I promised. And part of that is you're going to have an inheritance, and in addition to that, so many descendants as numerous as the stars in the heaven or the sand on the shore. And there's a lot of those. And I always think of Abram just looking up and saying, one God? Just one. All I want's one. I know the sand's great, but can I just touch and feel? Hold in my arms, one. Raise as my own, one. Well, he got his one. Isaac came along. The one that came before that through some arrangements that Abram had with his wife, etc. Hagar, handmaid, that one didn't count. So here's Isaac, and now God comes along in Genesis 22 and throws out a test to Abraham now by this time. I want you to take this son, and I want you to take your son, your only son, as God adds in there, emphasizing to him, although Abraham already knows it's his only son, but God says, I know too how you look at him, your only son. And I want you to go up on this mountain, and I want you to offer him. And the amazing thing to me is we don't read any kind of indication whatsoever in the Scriptures that Abram goes, what? Or why? I don't understand. No argument, no hesitation. The Scriptures talk about that the next morning he gets up early in the morning. Would you not have a reason to sleep in late that morning? Especially because you've been tossing and turning all night about the decision that you said in your mind, I'm going to go do, but then you're still not really sure you can do. But he gets up early in the morning and he goes off with his son, with the fire, with some servants along the way, and he does what God asked him to do. And just at the last moment, as he's about to take his son's life, you remember the story, God stops him. And then I like the phrase. God says to him, now I know. He passed the test. I think it was not only an awakening and a realization for God, although I'm sure God saw the process, but it was also for Abraham himself. Yeah, I guess I really... Now I know I can do it too, because I've got to wonder if he wasn't questioning, am I going to be able to do this or not? As he's doing each step along the way, kind of like you've done through some trials, and I just don't know if I can face it. But you end up facing it, and you're still questioning, and you get all the way through it. I did that, and I passed the test. Life is a test. Job. There is no indication in the book of Job, written about Job, the one book that bears the guy's name, and the whole book is about him, no indication that he ever understands what it's all about, other than he had a big test. And his test was that he had to deal with losing everything, absolutely, except for the wife, who kept basically just poking him, saying, why don't you curse God? It wasn't really good for him at that time. I'm sure things changed in the process. And we always read the very end, and we're so happy about how the ending is. And we know the ending as we start the story again, that God blessed his life even more than the first part and regave him everything, including children. Oh, well, that's good. But he's still wondering through this whole process, why is this going on? And the only reason that he had that entire test was so you could come back at a later time, and all generations throughout time, if they took the time to read it and say, life is a test. So as we go through life and deal with all these things, and as we begin to even look toward next year and set goals, question, am I testing myself? Am I challenging myself enough? Because knowing how we are sometimes, I like coasting. I love riding bikes, but it's neat going downhill. You go faster, and if it's warm, the wind's blowing through your hair. It's just a neat experience. The uphills are a little tougher. You're downshifting, and you're still going at it, and the heart's pounding more. And that's life in a way. But it's a test. But the real test is from God. There's a test of character, as you can look at the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. Joseph, in and out, every situation. It seemed like things went good, things went bad, and his character was being tested. Not only with Potiphar's wife was his character tested, but I think even more so as his parade of brothers is brought before him now with the power that he dreamed, that God gave him the dream about, that he was going to have. He never really understood why those dreams were coming, but eventually it was fulfilled that God gave him not only the dreams, but he put him in charge of Egypt, and now his brothers came in and they bowed down before him just like the dream of ages go. And he's looking at that going, wow, this is amazing. I can do what I want now to these guys that sold me. Test of character, Job was the greatest, I think, even more than Potiphar's wife, because he could have said, you know what, guys? I'm going to tell you who I am before I lock you up down in the darkest, deepest dungeon you could ever imagine in your life. But he didn't. Matter of fact, his reflection on the whole thing was, you meant it for bad, but God meant it for good. What a test of character in an individual like Joseph. Daniel's another one in Daniel chapter 6, a character that we oftentimes associate with being in the lion's den, and because of his relationship with his God, and he wouldn't stop praying. Now I find that very indicting in my life, because I'm never threatened on my life to stop praying, but I have plenty of things that interfere with the time, as I've often said to you, that I ought to be praying but miss because I'm busy doing other things. Good things, but I just don't settle in on visiting with God often enough and praying. Daniel, however, would not stop. His character was beyond measure. And not only did he rise to the top within his governorship, there in the country he lived, but he did with his God, and he was saved because of that. Number one, life is a test. So as you shove aside Christmas gifts and all those other things, and you start leaning a little bit toward, what am I going to do next year? Write down, am I testing myself enough? Just put it out there for yourself to think about. Number two, life on earth is a trust that God puts into our hands. James chapter 1, verse 17, every good gift and every perfect gift is from God above and comes down from the Father of lights, whom there's no variation nor shadow or turning. It doesn't change even a lick. That gift. Now, this gift of life is actually put into our hands as a trust. We could look at the way the book of Romans talks about, you're not your own, because you're bought with a price. So, David, as I say sometimes about myself, I don't own myself. I make decisions. I'm in charge, but I have to realize that it's just a trust because I'm not my own. God gave me what I have, and especially the blessed life of being one of His children and getting to be at this great congregation. It's a trust. Paul writes to the Corinthian church in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 2. Moreover, it is required of a steward. A steward's a guy that's kind of in charge of household activities. He could be the one that's in charge of all the activities in the house, or maybe just his particular job, with maid or out in the garden or wherever it be. But what's required of a steward? That he be found faithful. There's a trust involved. God says, I'm putting you out there, you're in charge of this, are you going to do what I ask you to do? And Jesus even tells parables about that. Two brothers, for instance, that come along as the parable is being told, Jesus is relating it, however, to some of the Pharisees, etc., of his time. And he says, it's like this. Jesus says, the father comes along and he says, first of all, he says, son, I want you to go do this. And the son says, no, I'm not going. But later, he changes his mind and he does go. He goes to the next son, he says, I want you to go out and do these things. And he goes, sure, I'll do it, Dad, you got it. I got you covered. I'm paraphrasing. But afterwards, he really doesn't do it at all. And the point being made here is there's a trust involved. And so Jesus comes across and he says, which one really did what the Father asked him to do? Laid out there, this is your trust. And if you look at some of the parables, there's a lot of parables that Jesus lays out before us that become trusts in relationships, in a lot of things, in dealing with the kingdom and all that we do. Jesus says in Luke 12, verse 48, whomever much is given, much will be required. And I lay a lot on myself because I think I've been given a lot. And I think we all really could say the same in a lot of different ways. And so the things that God has given us, our gifts, our abilities, as Jesus tells about the parable of the talents, for instance, we're going to have to come back to the Lord someday and say, here, God, this is what I did. So now as we're looking at life and what's life like and reviewing it from God's standpoint, number one, it is a test. But number two, it's a trust. What am I going to do with it and what's been given to me? And number three, I'm sure you're aware of, that life is temporary. Job, back to our character we talked about a bit earlier, in chapter 8, verse 9, he says, our days upon earth are a shadow. James does it, one step further when he talks about, what is your life? It's like a vapor. I mean, it's just, what are vapors? We walk right through them. With shadows, we step right past them. Nobody even pays any attention to a shadow except maybe a photographer or an artist, but everybody else just don't even think about it. I mean, how many of y'all drank coffee or tea or whatever today possibly? I mean, it had some vapor coming up, but did you stand there and stare at it and look at it like it was something important that was going to be there forever? No, it's gone. And so, as I'm thinking about goals and thinking about who I am and what I'm supposed to be doing, just as a Christian, putting us all on the same level because we are, I say life's a test. Life's a trust. And I better get with it because life's a vapor. It is so temporary. And as we look around in here, we know some that aren't with us that were here last year. And some that are still here. And keep on being here, but we don't know when that'll end. I say this too, as we oftentimes heard and read in little quotes and seen every little quip and figurine alongside it says, life is short. Don't sweat the small stuff. And then right after that it says, big bold letters, everything is small stuff. Of which sometimes I like to come along the poster and write, except for God, church, my relationships with my friends. Those aren't small stuff. But most of the things that really take up a lot of my time and concentration is small stuff. I'd like to have gifts for everybody just right, but really and truly it's small stuff in comparison to relationships. And it doesn't totally reflect my relationship. So what we do, we think about it, and it becomes the greatest thing about Christmas is making sure we have the right gift and ready. And we stress over that more than the big things. Think, Philippians 3:20, about these things as we're thinking about life. Our citizenship is in heaven. Think Psalm 39, verse 4. Lord, make me to know my end and to measure the measure of my days, what it is that I may know how frail I am. Or last of all, if you want to turn to this, 2 Corinthians 4, you can kind of think about this one as maybe you're sitting down working on goals for the year. Chapter 4, verse 18, and chapter 5, verse 1. I see them tied right together. While we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen, building, sweater, table, The things which are seen are temporary. But the things which are not seen, God, souls, those are eternal. Then chapter 5, verse 1. For we know that if our earthly house, this tent, this body, is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. So, thinking along those lines, life being a test, life being a trust, life being temporary, and there's something afterwards, I'm going to re-examine my reasons for doing my goals. Now, I might still say I'm going to exercise more and do whatever, but not as much because I want to look a little thinner or do whatever, as much as if I live another year longer, I've got some more things I can do while I'm in charge of this trust. Temporary as life is, I'll do with it what I can. So those are things. Viewing life with God's perspective. May God bless all of us in what God says in these words. Now, as we close our lesson, if you need a prayer, you're struggling, maybe with sin, and you need to confess something, or if you've never been baptized into Christ, I'm sure, with God's perspective, He says, I want you to get that right with me so we can have the right relationship. So come while we stand and sing if you need to respond.